Going. All right, everybody, hello and welcome to the October 2025 Jobs Report and Inflation Update. My name is Albert, founder of Albert's List. We're here to help you become the most resilient job search professional you can possibly be with AI, side hustle, and career skills, as well as keeping you aware of the current state of the economy. And just like we planned it up, we met 3 weeks ago to discuss and ask when the U.S. government would reopen. And just as we planned it, the House of Representatives is currently voting on a motion to concur in the amendment for House Resolution 5371 to reopen these United States. So we'll be watching that on one screen, and we'll be also listening to Dr. Reilly White, who many of you know as the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning and the Associate Professor of Finance
Full
at the
professor of
University of New
finance.
Mexico. The what?
Full professor of
The
finance.
full professor of finance at the University of New Mexico. I got to update my bio for that.
I know, I gotta send you a new one.
Yeah, send me a new one. Dr. White also serves on the board of the CFA Society of New Mexico as an advisor for the $4.7 million student-run University of New Mexico Regents portfolio and leads a series of financial literacy projects in the community. If you Google him, you will find him in many, many news stories throughout as he is called on to analyze the state of our economy and where things are going. And he is here every month to talk to us about the state of the job market and news and views that you can use to guide your job search. So join us here for the next 70, 75 minutes or so as we analyze the state of this market and as Dr. White gives you the state of the economy and answers your questions. In addition to that, we will also be chiming in to see when this government reopening bill actually goes through, and we will break in with breaking news. So, Dr. White, until then, over to you. This is dramatic and exciting.
I know. Thank you so much, Albert. We're here from Albert's List Santa Fe desk, and we're
Yeah.
telling you that
I love it.
that news that we've just got here,
Will
right
you
here on
finish your
the iPad.
presentation first, or will we get 238 votes from sitting members of Congress? Let's see what we can do, what we get.
2,000 miles from civilization. I'm here and ready to rock and roll. So thank you guys for coming out here and for being here tonight on this magnificent Wednesday. I know you're out there, you're commuting, you're stuck somewhere at work or maybe even on one of the Bay Bridges, rocking and rolling, but I'm so happy that you're able to make it today. So as usual, I love all questions. Please ask them, answer them, and I will give you some type of answer. And we've got this as well, and we've got a bunch of interesting topics to talk about. I've got a series of other things that were noted to me. We've got some questions passed on we're going to answer, and I'll kind of try to cover as much as I can in this. Let me rock and roll because I'm also going to bring up some of your other questions that I didn't have time to build slides on, but I really like them about everything from our 2026 forecast to what everything else is going to happen on in the next few months. And so as we await the shutdown as a whole, the big news today, we've got $15 billion a day heading out the door economically every day that the government remains shut down. And that manifests itself in different ways. And so you've got this combination of things in a few pieces. You've got the benefits the government does, the 2 million total federal employees, of which about 1 million or more, give or take, were furloughed. You've got people with delayed paychecks that haven't been paid in 6 weeks because of this current situation. Now on, I think, day 42-ish of this particular shutdown, the longest in history. And so this has a negative economic effect, as you might guess. It reduces tax intakes for things like sales taxes and GRT. It's tough to calculate the imputed or real economic effects because we know that when the government comes back open, those people will get their paychecks again. But the nature is anytime where you have a change in behavior or a change in habits, it does create frictions and uncertainty. Uncertainty is an economic cost. So rock and roll here. So today I was trying to let's think about some things. And regrettably, because of the excuse of said shutdown, they could actually do it if they wanted to. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has not released a jobs report. I had to dig deep, and I actually went to my definitely a top 20 favorite job data site, ADP, for their data. Private company, they do their own surveys and their kind of things. They align okay with the Bureau. We'll go into what the ADP does and kind of how well they align with the Bureau of Labor statistics on some of their portfolios. But here's what we got so far. So for the month of October, ADP gave us data. It's not the best data. It is not the best data in baseball, but it might be the second best. It's what we got right now. As an economy, we only added about 42,000 jobs in October, which was not very good. Usually we should add around 150 to 200 in an economy that's growing just by virtue of our population. In the Pacific region, so West Coast side, California up through Washington, you've got 37,000 jobs added. In the Mountain West, only about 2,000 net jobs added. Where were jobs added? Trade and transportation, they estimate about 47,000, 26,000 in health and services. And then we actually lost jobs. Surprise, surprise, in the information sector, down about 17K, and we lost about 15K in the professional and business services. And so if we look at the overall situation right now on the right-hand side, and I know it's tough to read, especially those in the cheap seats operating, or maybe you're just listening to us on an app on your watch, we can see that the statistics are none of these data is particularly good. You can look at trade logistics as being kind of an interesting spot as we approach the holiday season. Education and health services, and by education and health services, we really mean health services, have been pushing upward to 26,000, but a lot of red signs in the economy. Manufacturing is down, information is down, leisure and hospitality are down, other services are down. Jason asks, was the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics the one that got fired in recent months? Yes, that's correct, Jason. Good memory. And so the head of the BLS was fired. They added a new BLS chief, but because of the shutdown, they have not released this information. And this is an interesting debate we have. Like, it's something that could be released, but I suspect that the government is like, well, we don't want to release it because I don't think the data has been stellar. But I'm very interested to see what data comes out next month or in the future. So Jason, this is ADP, and ADP is sort of, since we don't have any BLS data on this, I'm using ADP. ADP is Automatic Data Processing Inc. So it is a private company headquartered in beautiful sunny New Jersey. And they also run these reports that produce data that we find very useful. And so they have a long and interesting history involving this. And I'll actually go on the next page to see how well they perform over time. I wanted to point out too. Oh, what do we got now? What's the word on the street, Melanie? I votes. Following the votes. Albert says that they send theirs out on Wednesday before the BLS does on Friday. Now, we look at the change in establishment size. We look at small businesses being particularly hit by recent job cuts. Larger companies in general increase their employment. Wow, 155 to 151. This is great. This is like the final scene of Lincoln we're watching right now. This is great. And they're like, Mr. Carruthers from Sacramento. Nay. It's one of those. So BLS and ADP estimates overall over time track relatively closely to each other. There's not a big surprise here, and they both listen and recalibrate based on data that they have. Seasonal adjustments happen. They prevent data misinterpretation by doing seasonal adjustments, and they adjust for things like holidays and other things that are big swings in the marketplace. And so the jobs report is it's always a little bit cooked, but it's done in an interesting way. Now, ADP has been an interesting metric when we compare it to BLS. And my statistics nerds in the audience, one of the ways we can look at this is, well, how closely do these two job indices track? Is ADP a good predictor of BLS? BLS, for a bunch of reasons, from their surveys to credibility, has been historically the gold standard in jobs. But we've got down the line, we know that the ADP relationship, if we look at the R squared, basically the line of best fit, how close these two lines are to one another, we see that ADP is pretty good and tracks BLS really well in things like professional and business services, trade and transportation, financial and construction. It does kind of a mediocre job at information. 0.93 R squared is okay. But then things like other services, 0.5, this is stellar. This looks like one of my articles I might write in academia with R squareds like that. Across the census divisions, bad at New England jobs, really good at Mountain West jobs, interestingly enough. And establishment size, they're pretty good overall at tracking. And so we have an interesting situation. This is some data, but it's all we got right now. And so that's what we're going to rock and roll with. Oh, goodness gracious. We've got this. We've got coming across here. Da, 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 da. Here's the other piece of news, though. So, you may have seen this recently. We've got layoffs announced in October. How many layoffs? Why are we laying off? And despite these strangely positive transportation and warehousing data, we found layoffs concentrated in two sectors. We found it in warehousing and technology that led last month's surge in layoffs. And indeed, the layoffs in October have been the highest amounts of October layoffs we've seen in 22 years, much like incidentally, the aurora borealis, which much of the country has seen in the last day or so, something that comes around only in peak solar cycles, which are 11 years or so. And a lot of times, the last time people are like, I haven't seen this in 22 years, 2 cycles prior. So it's interesting. Is it a coincidence? Yes, but I like to pretend that it's not. But this is a big deal because our layoffs have been tracking for October. Even last year, when we were a little bit nervous about this, they weren't this high. And this is somewhat concerning. And I also want to present two sides of the story here. Some people are like, well, layoffs are one thing, and you shouldn't read too much into this. But it is interesting, especially particularly before the holiday season. So one of the aspects, though, let's be fair about the data. Let's really look into this and see, are we actually seeing those layoffs so far, especially when it comes to our initial unemployment claims or unemployment insurance claims and continued unemployment insurance claims. There's likely going to be a lag here. And if we follow this through here, we get a little bit of a bounce typically in unemployment insurance the following month. We see it trending upward for initial claims, but nothing's out of the ordinary in the last year or so. Nothing overly spectacular. I suspect in the next few weeks it'll be interesting if those layoffs, once they are processed, announcing layoffs and then having your physical job cut are two different things. So I suspect that this surge in layoffs might result in some increases in these numbers, especially as we approach some of the December data that's coming out. But our continued UI claims, unemployment insurance claims, have not been overly catastrophic. Latest 52 weeks, in fact, this year the continued claims were trending downward, where the initial claims were trending pretty steady. So what's really going on here? So we've got layoffs that are being announced, some of which are coming to fruition. Some people are finding jobs in other sectors. But at the same time, we don't see an explosion as of yet in continued UI claims or initial UI claims, I should say. So is this a strong job market? Is it a weak one? It is definitely still, I would argue, a weakening job market. And another way I can look at this, let's dig back, peel over, so to speak, go around, chop up into tiny bits, and serve unwittingly on a hamburger the onion of UI claims as it relates to federal programs. And so when you look at things like unemployment insurance claims, particularly as they deal with things specific to federal programs, we expect that given the recent interest in government or perception of government efficiency, we would see a lot of these programs have issues with them. We have noticed in a significant threefold increase in unemployment insurance claims for federal programs that have happened just in the last month or so. So it is happening here as well. And if we look at the same week in the prior year, we're just so substantially, we're almost as we're 7 times higher comfortably. Now, the unemployment rate. And so, back in this situation, lacking BLS data, I have to look at the crystal ball and find other sources. But I've got the good old Chicago Fed out there doing Chicago things with its deep dish pizza and a Fed known for its incredible series of vegetable-laden hot dogs. But the BLS unemployment rate from the Chicago Fed has tracked upwards steadily since 2023 into 2024, and right now they've upgraded it yet again to about almost 4.4%. Now, this is a historically low unemployment number in aggregate over the long run, but the trend is what's important, and the trend is getting worse. And so what you're feeling is bad because what you're sensing is that stuff is getting a little worse. And then another way to do this, and this is Let's talk some Challenger report data. Challenger has been an interesting, we get a lot of interesting data from Challenger. They produce a really interesting take on layoffs. And, I was looking back at some of the old reports and some of the reactions we had back in July and August and other things. And people were like, well, you can see there's nothing unusual about this. And things have been pretty good. And, the Challenger report, it really matters if, we see a lot more layoffs that are being issued over a month-to-month basis. But with our little October bump, we're seeing quite a sizable number of layoffs throughout 2025 that have been announced, tracking seemingly well with the layoff announcements that we see in years like 2008 and 2009, and not unlike some of our better years where the layoffs tracked pretty evenly, like 23 and 24 most recently. And even other areas, basically through the last 15 years, most of the time the layoff data has trended in this category. But looking at the layoff announcements year to date, we do see that weakening in the job market evident here. 2020, we had that COVID-19 shenanigan. That's why that's off the charts craziness. What do you think, Colin? What's going on in Colin country?
Uh, so I just kind of want to be cognizant of time. So today I'm going to be a little more pushing the conversation topics. But looking ahead, it looks like the what you have is a lot of data showing that a lot of things are bad. Debt is high, paycheck living is high, student loan delinquency is high. A record share of Americans believe the government is doing a poor job on economic policy. Um, what is the good news?
No, good question. Oh, I'm not here to offer good. Well, the good news is it could be worse, maybe, and
It could be worse.
could be worse. That's right. Could be
It,
worse.
it could be worse. I mean, okay, so I'm kind of taking a look. U.S. mortgage cost as a percentage of household income is near record high. Uh, but aggregate household debt to GDP
Yes,
ratio
I
has
got
been
good news
improving.
coming. Yeah. Aggregate debt to GDP, we got that too. So, Colin, that's a good point. Staying on topic, and you're absolutely right, time-wise. So in that sense, so we've got a lot of bad data and some good things to talk about. I would say, so let's talk about a good thing for a second here. This is really interesting. And you've seen this chart floating around a while. This is Jeremy Horpdal's chart, and it's kind of looking at median family income controlled for inflation. I haven't checked these numbers, but it's very interesting. So when we think about in aggregate, this is a chart that goes back to the 60s. And the question is when we look at the amount of money that we're making, the United States as a whole, in some metrics, through 2024, I should say, has never been richer in terms of the economic size, the median economic size, and of course, the percentage of people who are earning above a certain income level. We can buy a lot of stuff. But the interesting part, and I was thinking about this too, and I had a reaction to this as well. I'm like, why doesn't it feel this way? Why does everybody right now we look at these charts and this is aggregate, and why do we feel like it's not necessarily better than it might have been 50 years ago? And that's because a lot of the material wealth we've increased, I think, has been at least partially come in the form of things like technologies and scrolling and Reddits and all these advancements in computer technologies, which have boosted our productivity. But it's not the same effect as going from the Great Depression and not having food to putting food on the table and getting that same sense of satisfaction that one would get from entering an old country buffet in 1975 and being free of want. And so I'm trying to figure out what's going on with this too, which is very interesting. Anonymous attend, yeah, yeah, yeah. So anonymous attendee asked, "What's the theorized to be the main causes of the barrage of bad data? Are many government policy related in the control of he whose name should not be mentioned?" No, it's true. I don't see yet, and I want to hesitate on that. I don't see yet evidence that and related to this question that I'm seeing manipulation or overt manipulation of data in certain ways. I think people are selective about the information they receive. It will be a huge Rubicon. It would be a huge boundary for us to cross as a nation if we start fabricating or not producing that data. And that slippery slope begins with not releasing it. And so I am concerned about that, but I don't see evidence of that intentionally right now. Uh,
Before you go on, we have breaking news.
oh,
As you
Albert.
see in the chat, um, Congress
Oh,
has passed the motion to reopen the government, 222 to 208, with looks like five Democrats voting with all actually with all Republicans but one. So,
Wow.
anyways, I thought I'd come back on screen to share that information.
The government is open.
The
All
government
right.
is open.
People are getting paid.
People are going to get paid again.
That's great. What a time.
Live right
At
on this
least
webinar.
through January 30th, ladies and gentlemen, the U.S. government is open. Good job. You've seen it live. You heard it from Albert first. He is the news. Remember this.
Oh
This
man.
is from the news desk. Eh, Very interesting stuff. Marlene, you ask, I went from I went from 120K year and comfortable to less than 10K year and close to homelessness. I moved way down. Indeed. And I want to also not, and to point this out, aggregate experiences do not indicate, are not representative of the whole. Your individual experience is as valid and more valid, certainly in your life, than me pointing out aggregate numbers. So I want to acknowledge, and you have my complete sympathies. I've been there before, and I've lived in my car before. It is terrible, and nobody should have those worries, I think. It's a shame, I guess, that we have to worry about these things in a materially rich society as we have right now. So huge issue. So I understand it.
There's an
Melanie says we can all
anonymous.
get jobs selling hot dogs at national park concessions now. Hey, hot dog sales. We all sell the same hot dog. Make sure we differentiate to allow our niche markets to develop in their own way. If we sell the same hot dog over and over again, we gotta really think about this. But maybe if I'm ordering what hot dogs people sell, am I creating a hot dog cartel? Ah, gosh, I have all these economic issues that we're bringing to the forefront today. So the Albert's List hot dog cartel coming to the Dodger Stadium near you. So paycheck to paycheck, living over time. And this is back to, let's talk about good news. Let's talk about bad news. I can't do one without the other. And since I was too sunshiny about the long-term benefits of material wealth in America, built primarily off of our trade benefits, among other things, we look at paycheck to paycheck overall. And this source is Payments Intelligence, and they do a bunch of little reports like this as well. The green line is you live paycheck to paycheck and struggle to pay bills. The black line is you live paycheck to paycheck without issues paying bills. So basically, paycheck to paycheck with not a lot of savings, and then live paycheck to paycheck overall is in purple. And you're looking at, depending on the variation, anyone who lives paycheck to paycheck, two-thirds of consumers, according to this, a number that's been tracking slightly upward in the last few months. Now, if we compare that to some other aggregate data, paycheck to paycheck means you might be feeling okay, supporting your standard of living, and just not saving a lot. That tracks to Fred numbers in general. If we look at the our Federal Reserve employment data source, they produce some data about U.S. savings rates. They track that data. It is single digit savings for most Americans in aggregate, and the people that can afford those single digits, even people that can afford to save. It is a challenging question as to how many consumers can actually do that. So this is a very instant. This is a piece of time when we think about issues and other things that are pressing. We look at a few different variables in the markets. We always look and we want to track delinquency across loans. We know auto loan delinquencies are higher. A lot of consumer loans are tracking higher. And when we think about the transition into serious delinquency, 90 plus days, student loans have been at the forefront of this since they came back online earlier this year, in the sense that repayment structures were continued. And we see that represents, for people ages 18 to 29, about 9% are in serious delinquency. For people in the 30s, it's about 13%. People in their 40s, about 15%. And if you're cruising in the 50 plus market right now, you've got 20% of those loans are seriously delinquent. And one of the most annoyingly challenging parts about student loans in general, as you know, in bankruptcy court, they are not discharged. So it becomes a significant issue, and for many people, it can be incredibly prohibitive, especially when you hit it, you're paying it off, things are being successful, and then a layoff happens. Something happens in your life where suddenly you can't pay it off anymore, and those interest payments compound, and you look for other sources. This is serious, serious shenanigans.
Yeah. There's a question
Oh,
by
yes. What
anonymous
do we got?
attendee. Isn't the middle class shrinking because taxation is increasingly regressive?
Interesting question. Is the middle class shrinking because taxation is increasingly regressive? I think that wealth transfers in general. So this is a good question. So let's look at the last 5 years in a nutshell, right? Up through the start of COVID, we had We had steadily, slowly, but indirectly increasing inequality in the United States. COVID happened. We had about 5 trillion in transfers, including a lot of government stimuli checks, among other things. That actually reduced inequality in the United States significantly for the first time in literally decades. Not significant. We didn't become the most equitable country after that. We went from being incredibly inequitable to slightly less incredibly inequitable from the standards of developed countries. And so since then, it is tracking upward again. And the question of middle class is what does middle class mean and what does it buy? And the confusing part about this chart is so yes, so if 45% of people make between 50 and 150 grand, 50,000 or less is 21% of people, and 33% of households are making 150,000 or greater, it looks like, especially controlled for inflation, that we have more things. But and the hard part is what does that buy? And I point out areas of technological change that have happened in history, right? And you remember Agatha Christie famously pointed out at the early part of the 20th century, she never thought she'd be rich enough to own a car, but too poor to possess servants because of labor costs that are associated with those things. And little she found herself without middle class servants that they had in the 1800s, and then found herself in the situation of being able to own a car in the early 20th century. And so the nature of what that basket of goods buys is key. And so, yes, one of the things that has become more dear, education, households, real estate costs have become more dear. And so, if those are the cornerstones of what middle class means, that has become more out of reach in different aspects of that question. If you look at just sheer material wealth and income being the source of this, I can go to Amazon and buy lots of stuff any day of the week. Then we are indeed the vision of prosperity. If I go back and consider one of my peasant ancestors from 150 years ago, and they say, look at all the things I have. I've got knickknacks on top of knickknacks. I've got an entire, and look at all these pens. Is what I would say to my great great grandfather, Stanislav. It would be one of those things. And so obviously, living the dream. And Melanie asks how much later in life student loans are for grad school. I would argue that later in life student loans in general, we're seeing a lot for grad school in those points. I don't know precisely the figures in that. Grad school has become, of course, is an incredibly expensive decision making at metric as well, and has become incredibly important for colleges as a source of revenue streams. And the metrics behind education in this becomes very, very important to understand and key. So I don't have that data, but I would suspect that it's significant. But then again, I know many people not many people, but I don't know the data on it. Actually, I do know many people in the 50 plus range still paying off student loans from their college years, which for one reason or another were extended beyond the normal payment horizon because of challenges they might have had, bankruptcies, years without repayment. And so they've extended it much beyond the maximum sort of or typical payment scheme that they have. Colin says, I thought student loans are all ready for life. That's the spirit in today's economy. You take out debt, we just pass it on and then we're buried with it somewhere in
It's bad.
it's
I'm
bad.
extremely lucky. I paid it off in 6 years.
Great
So,
job, Colin. That's great. May I
yeah,
interest
but
you in some more graduate degrees? Would you like
no.
University of New Mexico has
I've been through that and I'm just like, no, not unless a business is paying for me to go, but I'm just not doing that. Not again.
are you sure? Can't have too
Yeah.
many degrees. Can you have too many degrees? No, get a PhD, Colin. Everyone's doing it. It's great.
Oh my God.
Just take more. No, they're fun. PhDs are fun. It's a trick though. They get you most PhDs if they've come funded. Mine was funded, fortunately. So they give you like a little stipend, and it's just like a 4.5 year vow of poverty. But I still took out a little bit of student loans because I couldn't literally afford the rent that I was paying, and yeah, it was terrible times. But anyway, it's a thing. But you pay it off if you can. But for many people, they're saddled with debt, and it becomes incredibly challenging to get out of. Colin, kudos to the 6 year payoff. I don't know how long it took me. It didn't take me 6 years. How long did it take me? It took me maybe like 7 or 8, or I don't know. I paid it off early, but it was another thing. After Michael says, I was fortunate I paid mine off 20 years ago. Overpaid by about 20 cents. That's not bad. 20 cents. That's very fun. Or is that, yeah, okay. Number of years I used to get notices of unclaimed funds. The postage stamp to claim them would have been more expensive than what they would have given me. I know it's terrible. Congratulations. Here's your 20-cent rebate check. So, a record share of Americans believe that the government is doing a poor job on economic policy, about 64%, in fact. And this is the chart by Justin Wolfers, who's um, uh, very interesting to follow, and he's got some very good points to discuss around this. It was state of the economy, too, negative, neutral. We got one positive person out there. Good job, one positive. Good, stay optimistic. So, why would one be optimistic about the economy? And I'll need Colin's assist on this one. This is my favorite chart from the Financial Times, possibly ever. This is the best guess, the best minds in finance got together and said, what's AI going to do? And let's present the realm of economic growth possibilities. Let's a log scale of US real gross domestic product starting at $1990. Where are we now, and what's the trend going to be? So we have two potential outcomes, which I love more than anything. We have the AI boosted growth path in the middle, the best guess estimate of where the future will be. Will it extend, though, to the bottom case scenario where we proceed towards a tech singularity that involves human extinction? Or will we proceed towards the tech singularity, the end of all scarcity models? Colin, where are we going to end up with AI?
Um, your guess is as good as mine here. I can only say what I know AI can currently do and what it's going to do, but
Oops.
I've said
Sorry.
for a year now AI is gonna happen slower than you like and faster than you want. Right? This quote has been around for a year for everyone who's participated in our monthly webinars. And what's coming that you don't like is going to come really, really fast. And you're seeing it in the current bloodbath in the tech industry as people are getting laid off left and right to be replaced with AI. Although part of that is due to um, companies trying to shed weight as they pursue higher quarterly profits
I think
and
that's true
using
too.
AI as an excuse. While there is definitely proof in some cases that AI pilots are working, I'm still not a full believer. And I work in the industry. Uh, but the tech singularity of human extinction is definitely a very popular science fiction trope. And as a cynic, I think I'm kind of leaning towards that if we don't correctly rein in uh, the open AIs of the world, if you understand, right? Th
How
This is one
long
of the
how
things
long will we
where,
run the Albert's List jobs report in this trajectory if we reach extinction, Colin? Would we try to keep it to the end? Will it be the last thing on air that humanity sees?
I mean, we could always try,
Yeah,
but
I mean, if we go down towards that, I think trajectory where it goes to the bottom,
Yeah.
I think this becomes the, monthly farm report where you're talking about the farmer's almanac and Dr. White is talking about the supply and demand of seeds and, chickens. But yeah,
yeah.
Plant a lot of
So
seeds. Sometimes you get a lot of chickens.
take care of the bees.
we
Yeah,
we currently already. I think I could be wrong on this, but I read a while back that we already have enough food to feed everyone in the world. It's a distribution problem, so it's not a scarcity problem. Um, and I this is one of the questions I've been thinking lately is like, what is the current upper bound of humanity if we bounded together for 10 years?
Hmm.
And I feel like this would be an interesting question from a scientific point of view and an economics point of view, which is if every country and organization and individual on in the world like came together to accomplish something, what is the upper limit of what we could accomplish? And I think the limit of that is establishing a colony on Mars.
Hmm. I mean, I think we would see what that looked like if aliens or, extraterrestrials invaded us. It's a fascinating thought.
No, 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 no. I actually strongly believe there would be ones who try to that would be a huge political game. There would
Mm,
be people who try to ally with it and destroy enemies and then sell parts of humanity out. It
yeah.
is in human nature because the ones in power are always trying to stay in power.
Hmm.
There was
Yeah,
a
I mean, I think
actually
right, if every human being worked together, that would negate the whole notion of like competitive advantage because we'd all be like one unitary thing. And then what happens in the economic kind of environment at that point, right?
Yeah, but
Um,
that's taking a myopic view on competitive advantage being also not just interspecies but intraspecies,
yeah.
right? From my perspective, I've always been of the opinion that it makes no sense to compete with our own species. We should only be competing with others. Right now,
All right,
we are the
well,
dominant species, but assuming the idea that aliens do exist, they're also progressing at a fast speed. We're just not currently aware at what they are right now.
I'm gonna let Dr. White get back on track here
Sorry,
before we
that was
get
a
too
huge
deeply
tangent.
philosophical.
No, I love this. I mean, this is right. Literally, if you look at this from a Hegelian lens, power wants to preserve itself because every established order believes it is the final expression of reason. So maybe this is ultimate thing, but maybe not. But I like this as interesting. So overall, like a true economics and financial paradigm, they say there's a percent chance that it's infinity and a percent chance that it's nothing. Let's call that 0.2%. That's 0.2%, I'm sorry, 2.1% growth as opposed to our 1.9% long-term average. And I agree, Marlene, you're absolutely right. Scarcity is largely manufactured. The question is, what dimensions of scarcity do we mean when we say freedom from scarcity? And that's going to be different for every person. Like we can say freedom from food is probably, food scarcity is an accessible human condition that we could potentially achieve globally, although we're not there yet. As Colin pointed out, because we do have that ability and that distribution ability. But when it comes down to individual want, and because want is itself, it's almost unfathomable to see that expression being realized in some way. So I love the philosophical discussion you guys are looking at that. So very good. Ah, crap. Sorry, I've got a little bit of an itchy mouse here. So let's see if we can fix this. So one of the things to note, and again, one of the cool, interesting parts about this, mortgage costs as a percent of household income. Although we look at data that suggests that household debt to GDP has actually been improving in the last 15 years or so since the 2008 financial crisis. What's the biggest component part of household debt? That is the mortgage of the house. So yes, credit card debt is increasing. We have other things that are increasing, but because the mortgage is such a big piece of household debt, and in the 2006 to 2008 area, it was huge because of subprime lending, other issues, huge loans relative to low LTVs, a lot of people taking on houses they couldn't afford. Since that time period, it has come down due to interest rates going down. But even persistently in 2024, 2025, it's still not terrible, which is really interesting. On this level, too, mortgage costs as a percent of household income. We look across the board, there's a 2022 to 2025 bubble. And even though mortgage rates are low and household income in general, this ratio in general has been seemingly, and I love these two charts because they seem to contradict one another. If we go back to 2008 or so, the housing bubble, we reached about 39%, and we have this expensive amount of mortgage costs right now as a percent of household income. People are spending about 40% of their income on housing, but they're just buying bigger houses. And this is not bigger houses, more expensive houses, not bigger houses. And then if we look at ownership and inequality across the country right now, it's fascinating to see. If we look at just that who owns things like stocks in general, the top 10% of real estate is owned by 44% of the real estate is owned by the top 10%. 84% of private businesses are owned by the top 10%, 87% of stocks, and about 67% of wealth. Back to the question about inequality that we're seeing in general across the country. And then I want to address some of these questions that we had too in this situation. And so I had a very insightful question from someone in the metrics that said, "Hey Riley, is they didn't say hey Riley, they said you, economics guy, can tariffs ever be good, right?" And let's think about that question. Can tariffs themselves ever be good? Can tariffs, and I spend a lot of this time every month telling you how tariffs are bad, why they're bad, giving a bunch of examples why they're bad, and the history of tariffs and why we think they're bad in general. So I thought about this a lot. And even though on the left-hand side, even though the per capita tariff cost of where we are in 2025 is significant, including for the average Californian, over $700 a person, can tariffs be good? And the answer is yes. They can help emerging or strategically important sectors. One thing to remember when talking about any economic policy is that there are trade-offs in all things. We pretend there's not trade-offs. We pretend that this is the right decision. We tell ourselves that universally that things are clear and set in stone and these are better, but it really is never that way. There are trade-offs in all things. And so yes, I can establish a economic maximum trade policy of free and open trade in all commodities and all sectors, but those have trade-offs associated with it. And one of those trade-offs that we found in the last 30 years is the tendency for the following. For instance, tariffs can help things like clean energy manufacturing, semiconductor production. We learned about the fragility of global supply chains very well in the COVID pandemic. Tariffs can, for instance, discourage imports from countries that if your country values fair advantages that gain unfair advantages through exploitive labor conditions and trying to level fields for U.S. workers. And when a country has stronger environmental regulations than its trading partners, tariffs can offset some of these competitive disadvantages. These are referred to as carbon border adjustments. But depending on your politics and your perception on how these things work and what your opinions are, these do come with trade-offs. One of those is they do result in higher costs. And so it's kind of a fiction to say, oh, we'll add tariffs and simultaneously reduce costs. There's not really a mechanism within that, but you can encourage different industries among others. So Scott asks, does the same source produce a chart of U.S. health insurance cost as a percent of household income? It's off the chart, Scott, because we all know health insurance is incredibly expensive. One of the things too, and responding to that too, because I know there was some debate, particularly around the ACA as it pertained to the government shutdown. And so one of the things levied by the president and one of his ideas was let's cut people a check instead of ACA and they can buy their own insurance. So how does health insurance work? And so if you go back to sort of just a pure economics 101 sort of thing, the market works by distributing risk. And so you have high risk individuals, low risk individuals. You've got people with pre-existing conditions and people that don't. And if people are given the choice as to whether spend their money on things other than health insurance, people, of course, who are healthy might say, I don't need it. But that would then leave the market in an unsustainable spiral of where you have a lot of people who many people would find either with pre-existing conditions or other issues the market could become prohibitively expensive. It could break down. And so to make insurance work, you need the widest possible area. And that would certainly be in that case the death knell of such an insurance policy to present it that way. And so it becomes very, very, very tricky to manage this. I had a question from somebody, what sectors are still hiring? People are saying, well, overall, it is going to be healthcare in general. Speaking of the devil, when it comes to those things, as Scott points out, healthcare in general, both because not necessarily always things like doctors, nurses, but all those billing and all those extra other administrative jobs that end up going into this space. Purely, not only because we don't have an answer, we spend 17% of our GDP on the healthcare industry. It is an extraordinarily large growing industry with an aging labor pool. I mean, it's hard to not be optimistic about that sector when it comes surely from the amount of money and the amount of people that they're taking in. So, what industries are not changing? And they're looking at the B2C space. I only see a B2B. That's a really good one. A B2B AI space question. That's very interesting. And so I was taking some notes about that too. And I think one of the things I would say, so it's hard to look at static in industries, right? And so we look at those questions, and for instance, people look at things as, am I operating a typewriter company? Am I operating a niche things? Slower moving industries would be stuff like regulated utilities. Even though right now one would argue because of the push for clean energy or the historic push for clean energy, they had to adapt. I would say stuff like basic materials, heavy industrials in particular, have a lot of the same inputs. Waste management, if you're, in the Sopranos vein. Water and parts of public sectors and education, I think, are also sectors that do it. But even then, it's a question of slower rather than rapid pace in these areas. And then from the ones changing any in B2C and not just B2B, I would say stuff like consumer finance and retail, always undergoing revolutionary changes. And it's become a differentiation between looking at now a bank which has all these protections and FDIC rules and all these tech financial companies that are out there that don't necessarily, even companies like Venmo that aren't FDIC backed. Media and gaming, I think, is really good. I think to a certain extent, I would say consumer health, that kind of apps, fitness apps, those things, little devices that help us know more about our body and our positioning. Somebody asked, what is my forecast for 2026 in the economy? Where's the economy going? This entirely depends on a few things. I see continue right now. I see a lot of sources of disdain. Tariffs are one of them. I see a declining job market right now overall. I see continued pressures, and I don't see anything relieving those pressures unless we really do a few things in the market to improve our economic situation. And it's not just going to be a quarter point interest rate drop every couple of months. I think growth will be modest at best. I think inflation will continue to creep upward as long as we have tariffs. I think rates in housing, I think mortgage lock-in is keeping housing tight, but frankly, I think there'll be a lot more. I think that higher inventory will help keep prices more stable rather than increasing. I think and I want to reiterate this other policy thing. Let's talk about 50-year mortgages a second. I don't normally take opinions about this sort of issues, and normally I do try to present data in an affirmative light. I'll be frank with you, 50-year mortgages are colossally dumb. And this is what we call, so there's two ways we can look at the real estate market. We've got we've got a demand side incentive, which are things that we have to build demand. 50-year mortgages build demand because they provide other alternative ways to finance housing in an expensive real estate market. They do nothing about prices and in fact push prices higher by building that affordability window in. What we need to do to reduce the price of real estate, not reduce per se, but even keep it steady over time, is increase supply and the nature of that supply. And this grinds my finance gears. And so to give you a sense about why Riley is the 50-year mortgage dumb, let's say you're looking at a $500,000 mortgage. It's a 30-year term, a 7% rate. You're paying $3,326 a month for that thing. Over the life of this loan, you're going to pay about $697,000 to the bank. Rule number one in your life is don't give more money to the bankers than you need to give to the bankers. If you can avoid giving money to the bankers, as a former banker, do so and do the best that you can to pay off things in a shorter rather than longer period of time. Increase that term to 50 years. Indeed, you can reduce your payment by 9.6%. Congratulations, your $3,300 a month payment is now $3,000, but you'll be paying over the life of that loan almost double the amount of interest to the banks, $1.3 million. I couldn't have devised a more diabolical scheme for the average American than a 50-year mortgage, which would then not only entitle them to generational levels of debt, which, why not? Because we're all doing it these days. But at that same level, it just pulls money in at high levels without reducing your payment structure, and just sends that money right to the bank in the financial industry that should otherwise be incorporated into your house. Another way to look at this: 30-year, 50-year mortgages, a 30-year at 6.25. A 50-year at 6.75, it would likely have a higher interest rate. Look at that balance remaining. You'll be cruising. You can pay if you started at $500,000 on a 50-year mortgage at 6.75%, you would still owe $400,000 after 30 years because of amortization. To keep the payment structure the same, to make sure your payment is the same every year, that first payment you take out in a 30-year mortgage or a 50-year mortgage is almost all interest. That last payment is almost all principal. And then to make this work over time, it's got to look like this payoff structure. And so for 30 years, you've built up no equity on this thing other than real estate prices rising. And so the president's proposal will push upward pressures on real estate while not actually improving affordability in the long run. Please, in the name of heavens, oppose this in anything that you do. Well, if I am encouraging anybody to do anything in life, try to do, if you can afford a 15-year mortgage over a 30-year, you're going to pay the bank less money in the long run, but they are higher payments. And really, I mean, you can make a 200-year mortgage and it just won't fundamentally improve situations. So anyway,
Isn't statistically like the age of first-time home buyers like 40?
oh yes, it's catastrophic now.
So you're
First
gonna
of
be
all, you're right, Colin, it
90?
is 40 now. Yes. Actually,
Yeah.
yeah,
So if you're buying your house at 40, the
right.
average life expectancy is like 83. So you're gonna die 7 years before you pay it off.
That's exactly right. Congratulations. Here you go. You will never stop paying. And think of it as well. Think of it like in our working years. Okay, 30-year mortgage time, right? So imagine hypothetically, 30-year mortgages can work for you if you, let's say you buy a house in your 30s, and then if you live in the same place, I know a lot of people move, we do stuff, keep the same house, we often upgrade our houses. And then by the time you're in your 60s, you're ready to retire, you can pay off that house, and then you can live on a lower standard of living that's retired in retirement. The really hard part, Colin, as you just indicated, is you take that thing out at 40. And let's say you don't live to 90, but before you hit 90, you're entering not only a retirement phase where you can no longer afford the payments on that structure, perhaps, maybe you can, maybe interest, maybe inflation goes up and maybe you'll be able to do this, but then you'll need long-term care, you'll need all these other issues that will drain that, and you won't have developed that same equity structure you would have with a 30-year mortgage. And so, absolutely right. Michael, kudos to this. This is called feudalism. This is true. Banker feudalism. So if you
We never
can,
left feudalism.
it's coming back. Isn't it delightful? And I always keep that in there too, why housing is expensive. But we went over that last time. So I want to go over a few things. I know I kind of ran through a bunch of things real quick, and let me go back to the other slide too. Today was a little bit of a short session. Um, so I give you a forecast. Does the United States need to consider a plan for a universal basic income if AI is coming for all jobs? So let's assume those assumptions, right? Let's break that down. Will AI come for all jobs? Now, I may not, I do defer. Colin is by far the expert into this. Albert says the 1300 serf is the 2025 wage slave. Not wrong. Not wrong. Trapped in your home village. Will you get something? The Lord demands things from you. What do you do? I don't know. It's
Oh
interesting.
man.
So from the AI perspective, you can look at this in a couple ways. So if you assume that AI is coming for all jobs, I don't think we have an answer for AI coming for all jobs yet. But I like the question. Let's talk about UBI. Let's talk about universal basic income. So it certainly is an option. And I think in the meantime, though, knowing how, so for instance, it takes even for something as Colin pointed out, and I love what he said about it's going to be say that one more time, Colin, quicker than the adoption of AI. Because
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. The AI you want is gonna come slower than you like, and the AI
right.
you like is gonna come slower than you want.
Exactly. And it's also going to take a while for this to go through our system meaningfully because of all the barriers into it. So what can be done? And so instead of saying something, I could say UBI. And if we look right now, like that's a question that would necessarily need to happen in that scenario. But we're not in that. I don't know. It's really hard to imagine a political space where that's tractable. I think there's a few other things that you could think about. So you could modernize sort of or update some form of the earned income tax credit, for instance. You could look at wage insurance and these incentives for rapid reskilling for areas. I think you can look at portable benefits. I think are useful things: health, retirement, training. That's tied to the person instead of the job to allow people to fluctuate within careers. And child benefits, of course, necessary for the next generation. I think intermediate stuff like that is probably going to be more politically likely in the next 10 years than UBI, but some version of UBI. It's difficult to see. We've never had an economy that's looked like that. It's difficult to see how that would look, but I'd be in favor of some form of UBI if we had a high concentration of resources in a particular area or industry like AI. And there's been some interesting results and studies on this too about income levels too. And some of them have been a little disappointing. People have been having UBI, and sometimes the results are positive, sometimes the results are less positive, and it creates a bunch of interesting issues. Michael points out that's a good. Developers tend to report 20 to 40% productivity gains because of AI, but actually show a 20% reduction. That's fascinating. Colin, you've got some good points. Do you want to summarize them?
Yeah, I mean, the I get to see pretty much the bleeding edge of AI, what's coming up, what's new, what's interesting, what's wild. So for example, no one really asked for deepfakes, even though like there is definitely commercial and consumer value in being able to do AI generation. But the scam and fraud industry has never had such an amazing tool for conducting their business. It is one of the best tools. If next time you want to look up the scam and fraud industry and like how bad it's gotten in the last year compared to before, it's absolutely skyrocketed.
Right.
especially with industries that are slow to react to the fact that you can now easily fake someone's voice, someone's look, even during a call, especially with the video call. So things are definitely switching up. There's good with AI, but I think the problem is also both the distribution and the UI UX issue where the people who know how to use it are drastically leaving the people who don't know how to use it behind. I don't know how to fix that. So that's one of the other problems.
Mm.
Um, there's a bubble. I'm not going to be very specific, but I think the bubble is definitely in the models and the infrastructure. Um, but overall, for those
Mm.
that are job seeking, for I think Marlene and Michael, I think both of you are currently having a hard time. Definitely take a holistic look at how you can reinvent yourself as someone who understands the purpose of AI in your field of work, in your specialty, or in your industry. Be able to convey how you will add that skill set to your value proposition whenever you enter an interview or discuss, how you can bring value to the business, and definitely speak in terms of business ROI, productivity improvement, and workflow efficiency increases. And I think that would give you a stronger edge when it comes to your job search.
Right. I think that's incredibly solid advice, Colin, too. I think reskilling, and I think that point of using it as a tool and utilizing it and being able to understand and utilize it effectively is a differentiator, 100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone, so
Yeah.
if you haven't, you should definitely, if you use ChatGPT or Claude or whatever your AI of choice, like plug your resume into it and say, hey, what is the best way I can utilize AI in my day-to-day workflow? Or like, and then ask me clarifying questions about like what my day-to-day workflow and business objectives are and my role so you can better advertise yourself into my line of work. It's actually extremely surprising to me that a lot of people I've talked to who are in the tech industry have never asked AI this question because it is self-referential. AI is incredible if you know how to use it, and people just haven't learned how to use it correctly because no one's really explored the depths of it, which is kind of surprising considering the speed of advancement you can get with it. I don't care what industry you're in. I'm pretty sure if I sat down with you for 15 minutes, I could figure out a way to improve your efficiency, your workflow, or your processes by a solid 30 to 50%, without understanding your industry or role that well, simply because I know how to prompt the AI correctly. And all I have to do is like, feed what you do into the AI and then ask the AI what is currently inefficient about this process. Or if it's more soft skills than hard skills, stuff like how can I better present my ideas to my boss who cares about X, Y, and Z? Because, for example, a lot of people who are engineers don't understand how to present their ideas. They're very technically good. They're very, very poor at speaking to it.
Yeah,
And one of the things I've told my engineering coworkers is, hey, you're incredibly smart, but you're losing me when you talk to me, or you're losing the audience. So you need to speak to the audience. Plug everything you want to say into the AI, tell it what your audience is, and tell it, hey, I need to interest my audience in what I'm about to say and get them to act on this. And then have it give you the script and just follow that script. Because you're good at what you do, but you're bad at explaining yourself to others. So you should be leveraging AI in that aspect. And that's how you can use AI for soft skills.
I love it. This is great too. I want to get back to Robert had a question about SNAP cuts in the Affordable Care Act. He says, will cuts in SNAP or the Affordable Care Act cause a lack of demand for goods resulting in less employment? That's interesting. And so SNAP is in general, this is very interesting. I live in a state which has the highest proportion of SNAP users of any state. We have about 21%, about one in five. Nationally, it's about one in eight or so. Average weekly benefit in SNAP is around $189. So a few facts about SNAP real quick on what this does. So indeed, pausing it, and indeed my state, New Mexico, because we have this massive oil-induced budget surplus, provided SNAP. We had a bill passed that provided state-level SNAP over over the next few weeks during the government shutdown issue so it could be funded. As a whole, in the state of 2 million people where I live, we spend about $1 billion goes into SNAP funding a year. So it's sizable. And that goes to things like grocery stores, spending in other places. And so proportionately, that's a little bit less than or around 1% of the overall economic size of this area. There's research that shows that SNAP benefits, when people receive them, they actually spend a little bit more on food than might otherwise do. But it does have a lot of positive nutritional aspects. A good example being they studied students who were taking the SATs and found that those who received SNAP benefits scored higher earlier in the month when they were more food secure than at the end of the month when they were less food secure. And so there is an effect on people's grades, their livelihoods, their retention ratios. There's all these other things that happen in life that can come from food insecurity and not having enough on the table. And even in this nation of plenty, we have so many people who just can't afford it. And so, to your point, Robert, cuts in SNAP are a big deal. And the Affordable Care Act too. I think that's even harder because when you look at the questions of insurance and keeping those insurance markets active, you need to have a large pool of distributed risk. And so if you cut SNAP, that will cause a loss of demand, and it's difficult to say it will cause an increase in employment. It will definitely produce an increase in hardship on their own. And I would say in both those places, they'll be significant. Tammy says, what would be the economic impact of most Americans canceling Christmas or reducing Q4 2025 spending? What an interesting question. So, average Christmas spending per household. Normally, we go into this question, and it's usually like $1,000 or so on Christmas. And the National Retail Federation, I haven't checked out their new numbers on this, and sometimes they produce some data. Let me look that up. NRF, they produce some data on this, and they look at the average American household will spend about 890 on holiday related expenses this year, which is going to be the second highest in the history of the survey, so not the highest. So they're anticipating some cutbacks. I don't think it will be devastating, but you'll see that in a few ways. You'll see fewer retail hires on that end. You fewer of the temp work. That means that's that nefarious cycle where households will bring in less money. They'll cut back from some of the consumer spending. Consumer spending is about 2/3 of our GDP and the economy. It's a huge driver of all things economic. Although we have seen, we see these cracks now for the last year, and we see people, especially in the bottom 50% of the income distribution, pulling back. But again, people are rocking and rolling at the top 10% level with increases in stock, making people feel wealthy, the equity in their houses. And so what's driving aggregate spending are these areas often over the poorer areas. But you're going to see a continuation, I think, in particular, of which stores go bankrupt. I'm thinking, more along the lines of stores that cater to middle and lower income class consumers in particular. We'll find it harder and see some of those sales cut back, especially this year. And Michael's got some good points about AI. And then that was good discussion from Colin and Michael. Marlene says, I've been soft boycotting Christmas because I don't have a family. And I don't hang out with anyone. Aw, first spending with a 750 milliliter bottle of vodka and my salty tears. What
Oh
a great
boy.
salt caramel martini. They're onto something, Marlene. I call it, that's fun. Sadness by Marlene. It'll be great. And, I'm sure it'll be bought out and then very successful to sell it on the internet. And then Total Wine will create a generic version that will dwarf the market. That is terrible, Marlene. That's hilarious. And I appreciate you. That's excellent. That's good. How much does it cost for a tear? How much? What is it? Here it is. All right. Good stuff. And did I miss any other questions from the question list? Let me take a look. I'm bringing up Albert's emailaroo here. So AI bubble. Oh yeah, remote type work. That's a good question. So I think we're close now to some kind of hybrid equilibrium in the remote market. Most knowledge firms have settled on a few anchor days in the office, at least, with a lot of task-based flexibility around this. Remote is actually one of those things that sticks best where output is measurable and talent is scarce. It's weakest though in these early career roles where you need that constant attention, you need that constant networking ability and apprenticeship type stuff and hands-on or high coordination teamwork. So if I'm looking at remote work in general, I would expect sort of smaller, denser offices and on-site. We should reach a market where when we're on site, we're doing on-site sprints as opposed to 5-day commutes. But again, things change over time, and I've worked for a number of people who have been favorable to all being there all day, every day, and that's the job I have right now, and that's less fun than any other occupation. So it's interesting, especially as the labor market weakens, firms feel less compelled to offer that as a suggestion. But I think it's never going away. And I think our ability to manage that and measure that will become a key factor in the future. Bay Area tech layoffs. Question about this. Is it a short-term correction or a longer-term slowdown? I cannot reiterate how much tech layoffs in particular are cyclical, and they come in these massive cycles. Some last years on end, and the doldrums can last for years as well. And we saw a push up in hiring post-pandemic, and since that dropped off, we've now seen it go squarely in the layoff area for all the reasons that I think Colin was very astute and very eloquently mentioned. Number one, not only just the AI factor, but also the investment that firms need to make to maintain profitability and cut costs. They're making a decision as to maintain and indicate profitability for investors. Am I going to invest X dollars in people or in the necessary data centers, equipment, et cetera, peripherals that go into making the infrastructure? And we have this big push for infrastructure right now. And that's massively taking up a lot of things. Amazon cuts were really interesting in particular, Albert. And this was good because we were all like, is this AI? And Amazon was like, no, no, it's things and efficiencies and issues. And it is. I mean, firms look at this from an overall standpoint and they say, well, I'm going to invest in these technologies, these services, other things. And to free up those costs, they will do so by creating efficiencies in other areas. So I think it is very much affecting the market right now.
Vikram has asked the question,
Yeah.
why are extra subsidies needed for ACA, the recent battle over extra subsidies authorized during the pre-pandemic? Is it because they removed the mandatory requirement to buy insurance at the federal level?
Good question. So why are the extra subsidies needed? That's a very good question. Let me think about that one. So, is it because they removed, so you say, is it because they removed the mandatory requirement to buy insurance at the level? So it's at the federal level. So I would say no. I think that in general, subsidies kind of address the underlying high cost issue associated with health insurance premiums in general. And so it's a huge challenge to make health insurance affordable to individual rather than employer type markets. So if we look at, and and I have to see the original ACA law, and I can find it somewhere. Subsidies I think were available with households with incomes from usually a percentage of the poverty level. It went from you're at poverty level to like 3 or 4 times higher than the poverty level. And then the idea was that premiums for things like higher order plans could be high, so the subsidy helps sort of bridge the gap between the plan costs and what the house can and a reasonable household can afford. And without those subsidies, many middle income individuals buying in the marketplace would face really high premiums relative to their incomes. And that would mean the market would break down. So it's very strange, if you know that, get a sense in this. You need to have subsidies operate that way. Yeah, too. And Melanie says, weren't the subsidies to entice? Yes, not only just entice, but make it work for them because they can't afford it otherwise. And so, because it's so prohibitively expensive to maintain health insurance, those subsidies make the market work and help keep the market active by providing a larger risk pool that's attractive for people. Otherwise, really, middle class people opt out, other people opt out, and that's it. Google AI response. The COVID pandemic called. Oh, thanks, Scott. Yeah. I don't know. No, I think that's I think it's market based. Yeah, that's good. I think it's to make sure. I think Melanie's right. It's to maintain the middle income people. And that's kind of what I was talking about with subsidies earlier. Middle income individuals buying in the marketplace could face high monthly premiums relative to their incomes. Because imagine you have to make sure there's enough people and a diverse number of people in this insurance market. Having those subsidies enable that population to exist. Otherwise, it really does break down. And then people who have pre-existing conditions just don't get insurance because they can't afford it. And then we have just, and then people die. And that's the real difference in this market versus others.
Well, well,
That's a good question.
there's much to.
You look that up. I love it.
Much to
Good question.
digest. Yeah. So, we have a month between now and our final call of the year, which I think is December 11th.
Yes.
Any predictions on what happens between now and then? Holiday spending? Colin, does the AI bubble begin to crack some more? What are we seeing?
Oh, OpenAI is I don't know what their path to profitability is, if I'm being super honest.
Yeah, I mean they've made what, like 20 billion and they've spent like 500?
Yeah. Sam Altman needs only $7 trillion for his dream to come true. But he'll settle for 1 trillion, right?
He'll raise
Um,
ChatGPT to from 20 to 80 bucks and maybe that'll
it,
fix it.
I just don't know, man. There's no way there because each query is like 2 cents depending on what you're doing with ChatGPT, but I think it averages out to 2 to 4 cents. Um, and it's burning. It burns so much money. I'm not seeing how he can make it profitable without both ads and internal affiliate marketing, plus raising the price. And it's just never gonna look good.
October jobs data may never be released.
I missed this press briefing today, and this depresses me even more than that. So, this is troubling. The BLS has been unable to collect price data today, and the government just said we may never see this data, as it turns out.
Lovely.
Isn't that interesting?
The way the headline is titled just sounds just kind of silly, but yeah.
It may
Um,
never be released. I don't know who can. So
Put
that's
some
depressing.
X-Files music to it, right? And that's what you end up getting. Um,
Economic data should never be a political decision. This is an
yeah.
apolitical thing. You study markets because it's how the world works, not because it falls into political metrics. So that depresses me in a
Yeah.
jovial Riley way, but it, depresses me nonetheless. So to answer your question, Albert, and to hop on Colin's back around AI, another reason I'm not particularly confident in this, but I'm more worried now about our availability of data to show what metrics are out there. Normally, at the end of the year, we'd have a projection, and you'd be like, "Are we going to see a negative jobs report in November or December?" And I'd say, Colin and Albert, I think we actually might have a negative jobs report in November or December, but apparently we will not, for one reason or
Look, I'm
another.
telling people that I expect a full-blown recession at some level next
Yeah,
year, probably in parallel with what Colin's been saying around a bubble bursting, because,
yeah.
right, AI infrastructure spending is the only thing keeping our GDP afloat at the moment.
Exactly. And it's going, you're absolutely right. The amount of AI infrastructure is huge. And so without that, this train will end somewhere. This track doesn't go on forever. Even
Yeah.
with the productivity enhancements of AI, this is frothy.
So, like, it's worth asking, right? Because so no two recessions are alike. But if this one and this one will go to some kind of like recessionary thing, what does that look like? Like what?
Yeah.
Because I think for a long time we have recessions that have hit individual industries. The last one was finance, this one's tech. But because software has eaten the world, does that mean that we're going to lose everybody everywhere and it'll be the everything recession, much like the everything bubble?
So this is interesting. So right now we have this expansion in GDP, but it's like a jobless growth rate. Our job growth is flat, if anything, and it's terrible. Will this result so let's address a couple of those things. So Albert, I agree that I wouldn't be surprised if we have a full-blown recession in general. I think that
Mm.
The question of value creation is still incredibly diverse in the country, and we look at the nature of trade and everything else. We still are a very interconnected global economy. We can focus on all the negatives all day long, but we still produce things of value. We still do things of value. But that being said, the trajectory is such that, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised really in the next year if we saw a truly recessionary environment. But the question of recessionary and measuring that recession is different than we might expect. And that's going to be the hard part. If GDP is still going up and jobs are going down, that creates a situation that we haven't really seen. Um,
I would say, like, at
yeah.
worst, we get a full-blown recession. At best, we end up in stagflation. Right?
Ah,
That's what it feels like to me. And obviously, right, we have a lot of folks here on this webinar who are in a lot of personal recessions too. So, you know.
we are, exactly. And Melanie says, aren't we already in stagflation? It's true. Technically, though, Melanie, because we have inflation still, but even though we have low job growth, we have GDP growth that's cruising at the 3 to 4% level right now because of, as Colin Albert pointed out, this massive investment in infrastructure and AI driving not a huge proportion of this, but a lot of our crowding out a lot of other economic activities.
And the
And
other thing is, a lot of these infrastructure commitments, and Vikram, I see your questions. A lot of these infrastructure commitments
oh yeah,
are
I got a
are
Vicar.
future facing too, aren't they? Like
That's true. And so
Microsoft says they'll build a data center in some billion amount, but that
right.
data center won't actually be online until like spring of 2029.
Right.
Yeah.
There's always transitionary costs and there is always the risk of building over capacity. And
Yeah.
that's true too. And Vikram asked an interesting question. I want to address this.
Yeah.
As a follow-up to my question last month, if maintenance of price increases post-pandemic are not due to underlying fundamentals, disruption due to supply chains, for instance, shouldn't the government intervene to make it rational? That's a very interesting question. So if post-pandemic price increases persist without corresponding cost or productivity changes, that suggests, or I would suggest, imperfect competition rather than sound market fundamentals. So prices could remain, for instance, elevated because of things like market concentration, asymmetric information about how stuff works and the value of what something is, price stickiness, ongoing supply shocks. Now, the hard part is when the government embarks on something called price controls. When price controls exist, that distorts economic incentives, but instead should actually look instead of the natural indication is let's distort these incentives and let's create price controls and let's overinvest in the market. And that's a very rational human concern to do this. Price controls often don't work in the way that we intend, but they should instead, for instance, or one thing I would do is you look at what's causing the breakdown in the markets and what's causing the breakdown in competition, and you need to strengthen that competitive pressure. For instance, antitrust enforcement, transparency requirements, supply side improvements that increase market and improve the logistics of market entry and stuff like productivity. And the goal, I think, we shouldn't try to administratively rationalize prices, but to restore conditions where prices can reach their fair levels kind of on their own. And that's how I would say. And Vikram says, I understand the policy of governments to inflate away its debt. I don't, this is really interesting. This is a debate among economists too, in this sense, about the inflation of debt in particular. And that's a good question. So we have a ton of debt. We look at our debt relative to our GDP. Our debt is higher right now than our overall gross domestic product in a year. We compare our aggregate debt to our total household wealth, and it's still relatively small. What you're suggesting is indeed something you can't inflate. When we talk about inflate away debt, that works if you're able to, I shouldn't say it works. Inflate away debt as prices increase, right? Debt becomes inherently more affordable as a percentage of it. If prices went up 100% this year, it'd be terrible for consumers, but we're looking at a debt load that has been proportionately driven by half. The problem is that we've run budget deficits for the last 30 years, since the mid 90s, in fact. And that collective amount of deficits that we've run is our national debt, and it's owed by everybody in the form of bonds and everything else that we own. And so when we come to the question of how do we address the national debt issue or debt issues in general, it's not so much that we can inflate it away because it's a matter of because inflating it away won't do any good if we're still running budget deficits that are increasing the amount of takings and the amount. So if we're running an 8% budget deficit, in a high inflationary environment, we're still it's a net wash on our fiscal improvement at the end of the day. And now we're torturing consumers with high inflation. The Fed's policy is to keep inflation around 2% right now. And ideally we're in a situation where you're looking at trying to maintain this debt load. We have to be more fiscally careful about government expenses. That hasn't happened. I think, though, we have 10, 20, 30 years before it becomes a real fiscal problem for the United States. So, and then the policies the government would perform would likely not be based on inflating away debt, which would drastically harm consumers. And we could end up in a spiral where that high inflation then hits consumers so badly. Keeping inflation at 3 or 4% is manageable in an economy, but if it gets higher than that, it's very hard to maintain. And then that creates a situation where consumers are now punished and creates all these other negative economic externalities. Sorry, I went on a high horse
Good
and a little,
grief.
yeah, that was a good. Vikram, I appreciate you asking those questions, though. That was
Yeah.
good. Those were good questions.
Well, I know you have something at the bottom of the hour, Dr. White, so I want to thank you again
Yeah.
for your time here. For everybody else, I want to thank you all as well for coming too. And I want to give us a chance actually to promote a really special webinar that we're doing on December 1st in a couple of weeks. You may or may not know, but we are going to be talking to California State Treasurer Fiona Ma. She is the lieutenant gubernatorial candidate, and she's going to come talk to us about the state of what she thinks the job market will look like and what job seekers can expect in 2026. So come ask some of your tough questions. I'll be asking her some of the tough questions. And she might also be promoting her candidacy coming up as well. And so if that's something that interests you and compels you, please join us. It'll be a really, really fun time to be had. Um, And I know, Dr. White, that probably interests you too to some degree, right? So,
Oh, very much so. I served with our New Mexico state treasurer. I served on her.
mhm.
I was one of her transition team, 3 transition team members too. So I'm a big fan of state treasurers and the jobs that they do in general. So that's very exciting, and I cannot wait for the state treasurer Moss presentation. That's fantastic.
Yep. And then we will be doing our next webinar on Thursday, December 11th. It will be the final Alberts List webinar of the year before I go on a worldwide trip and go somewhere else for the holidays. So feel free to join us for then. We'll probably be finally talking about a jobs report that covers the month of November, hopefully an updated CPI report if we ever get one as well, and taking your questions. So please sign up for that. The link for that is also ask ChatGPT for the jobs report. The link for that is also in the chat here as well. So please sign up. Please join us. We look forward to seeing you. And you know what? Look, it's still a super interesting time. I think I've said that every webinar for like the last like 10 webinars. Um, and you hear it from Dr. White and you hear it from Colin, right? The AI market is starting to probably sputter a little bit, and there's probably going to be an avalanche that just, takes everybody out or takes a lot of people out. And that's not financial advice to go and tell you to trade on anything or anything of that sort. It's just something to watch out for. Hopefully it doesn't go that route. And so that's what it is. We wish you the best of luck in your job search and all your endeavors over the next month, and we look forward to seeing you really soon, both for Fiona Ma and for Dr. White. And so, yeah, have a great Thanksgiving and see you later. Bye.
There's everyone.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys. Have a great evening.